This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments directly onto whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and assuming that you're watching live, they'll show up here in my chat room and we can talk directly. And, as I often say, that is my favorite part of this particular format. And I've been doing video presentations for many, many years, and I've really enjoyed watching the technology develop and coming to the point that we can have this kind of very immediate conversation in the way that we can now have it. I'm looking forward to how this is going to further develop as we move forward. And you can be reasonably sure that if I'm still here, I will be adapting whatever the newest technology is to attempt to improve what I'm doing. Today, we have our roundup of interesting stories from the week, and we have a couple of interesting stories from the week. And hello to Christine in the chat room. But I have an interesting story, and hello to Janet in the chat room, that I happened to see on Instagram last night. And it is an example of what people are doing with AI technology. It was a photograph from the 1800s, which had been basically animated. It was a small child, probably about 3-4 years old, and they had first improved the quality of the photo to make it a little sharper. And then they had done what you have been seeing for a while in this sort of thing, that they caused the photo to be able to move a little bit and blink, but then they were able to make her walk and act as though she were alive. And while I'll grant you, I have a little mixed feeling about that. On the other hand, I'm quite in awe of it. And the idea of being able to create what are in effect moving pictures of people long dead in this way, I think is fascinating, especially from the point of view of ancestor veneration. So although that's not strictly speaking a news story, it was news to me that we have come to that point in this. And I find it quite exciting. Of course, we've been able to animate images for a while, but this was the most advanced one that I've seen. There may be more advanced ones out there that I haven't. Hello to Mary Cavalcante in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. And the actual news stories I want to talk about today, I want to talk about the attack on Stonehenge. I want to talk about the new law in Louisiana. I'm sorry, the new law in Illinois banning book banning, which I think is a fascinating development that I personally am very pleased with. And I want to talk about that whole 10 Commandments thing. And we may talk about other stories as well, but these are the three I really want to look at. And I think I'm going to start with the 10 Commandments thing. And as you may have heard, Louisiana has made it mandatory to display the 10 Commandments in all classrooms. And hello to Gwenny in the chat room. Now, on our last Pagan News broadcast, and by the way, the next Pagan News broadcast will be this weekend, but we had a story on a similar law being advanced in Tennessee, but it's actually passed in Louisiana. And, I obviously do not have good feelings about this. As a member of a minority religion for whom the Judeo-Christian 10 Commandments has no meaning, I find this a very aggressive act. certainly an act of religious indoctrination. But equally, I find it an act of fraud on the part of the state government. Why do I say that? Why do I say, and I do say, that they're defrauding their constituents? Louisiana is of the 50 states, the 45th in level of education, which is to say their educational system is abysmal. By doing this, they're convincing a relatively credulous population, presumably relatively credulous, that they're doing something to help the children, which isn't going to do a damn thing to help their education. If anything, arguably may set it backwards. But they're going to act like they've done something important, when in fact they're distracting from anything that would have made a real difference, and using money that could have made a real difference in the teaching of their children to do this piece of religious indoctrination. The amount of money it will take to display the Ten Commandments in all these classrooms could have been used to buy school supplies, could have been used to hire additional teachers or raise the pay of the ones they've got. In reality, it's doing nothing of benefit for anyone. It is at best a distraction and at worst, again, a setback. So I think not only from the point of view of separation of church and state, but just from the competency of government, this is the kind of thing that really makes you look and say, what? And do people in this state actually think that this is doing anything to help the real problems that they have with their educational system? It's at best an emotional bandage and distraction from what really needs to be done. But then, I would not be the first one to point out that there is a large movement to privatize education in this country in order to make money off of it, whose goal is, in many cases, to sabotage public education. And this certainly is a step in that direction. If I had school-aged children and I lived in that state, I would be looking for other alternatives. And I can only despair for the future of the 45th poorest educated state in the country. So that's our first story. Our second story is the law in Illinois banning book bannings, which is a bit of an oversimplification, but on the 14th of June, Governor Pritzker of Illinois signed into law a measure which makes it illegal to ban books from public libraries for doctrinal or partisan reasons. And Christine in the chat room says, as a certified retired teacher, I agree with you, Rev Don. There are much better ways to use tax money. Absolutely. And as we know, there's been a huge movement, particularly from Christian nationalists, to ban lots of books out of libraries, especially school libraries, but even public libraries, that deal with subjects they don't like for doctrinal reasons. And hello to Black Crystal in the chat room. In Illinois, that is now illegal. And this is one of the reasons I'm glad to be back in Illinois. Illinois has its problems, to be sure, but this is exactly the kind of law that would benefit most of this country. And it doesn't say that a library cannot refuse a book for other reasons, but not for doctrinal or partisan reasons. You cannot ban the book because it disagrees with your religious point of view or your political point of view, and I think that's highly to be desired as an attitude. I think that I was one of those people growing up who hung out in the library extensively. It was my favorite part of school. Even before I could read, I was hanging out in the library and taking home books in that very first part of first grade for my mother to read to me, as she had been doing throughout my preschool years. And Gwenny says, as a school librarian, I'm so excited for this, um, even though my district's policy was not to ban books already. Absolutely. And, many libraries across the country, many school districts across the country have stood against this movement. But to have such a firm law on their side, I think is a great advantage. And I would love to see this all across the country, personally. Um, as I say, I used that library even before I could fully read the books and was still addicted to libraries until the coming of the internet. And I still love libraries, but now the internet itself is my primary library. But for many people, even now, their best access to the internet is their local library. And if we want to keep an informed population, if we want to keep educated people, we have to keep these materials available to them. Again, there's a huge movement in this country on the part of Christian dominionists slash Christian nationalists to fight against education of all sorts. Partly because education causes people to reject their point of view, and partly because the more educated people are, the harder it is to just get them to follow along with anything. And the better educated a person is, the more likely they are to have critical thinking skills, which is the absolute enemy of Christian dominionism, or really fundamentalist religion of any kind. And, we see this here with Christian fundamentalism, but we also see it with Islamic fundamentalism, and any kind of fundamentalism around the world is trying to eliminate higher education because it often disagrees with them, trying to limit what is available in libraries, if libraries are even there. And we really cannot permit this to triumph in this country. For many people, the library, even now, is a major resource to subjects they cannot easily access otherwise. Because even today, not everyone has home internet. Not everybody has the tools to use the internet for their education. Many people are still reliant on traditional books or on accessing modern technology through the library or their school. And we need to maintain an educated population. And if we allow the suppression of education, we have no one to complain to later because of what happens. And it will not be good. And if we want to combat, shall we say, the forces of evil, for want of a better term for it, which is to say Christian nationalism, Christian dominionism, fundamentalism, not using the term evil in an existentialist sense, because that's a whole other program, but I think it's an appropriate term for these people. The only way to do it really is through education. We must maintain the education of our population if we can possibly do it. Certainly, we must work to maintain and increase the education of our community. Without education, people are very defenseless against all sorts of things. And I could go on at great lengths. Having been trained as a commercial artist, which is to say part of the advertising industry, about how advertising is used to manipulate people. This is partly because people do not have, for the most part, highly developed critical thinking skills. And it often doesn't occur to them that the commercial they're watching is only there to manipulate them into buying the product. they don't question these things, as they should. Um, we see, of course, the same thing in politics. And the more that we can do to educate people to question what they're looking at, the better off we're all going to be. Um, there's an old song called, I think it's called "Up to the Dusty Attic," and the refrain is "Up to the dusty attic and out with the trusty gun." Ask, and part of it is ask yourself, who does this serve? And if the answer isn't you, um, you have problems. I don't remember all of the words. It was one of Lady Bitterwind's favorite songs, however. Um, but it is, they are words to live by. You should always ask yourself when presented with an argument, who does this argument serve? Does it serve you? Does it serve society? Does it serve any good purpose? Or does it serve um, a partisan or doctrinal agenda for someone? Or a commercial agenda for someone? And I'm not saying, because I've spent this whole week focusing on the idea that we'll be much happier if we look at the good things in life. So I'm not arguing against that today, but I am saying keep your mind in play, keep your critical thinking skills in play, because it was not that long ago that the doctors of our country were happy to recommend which cigarette was healthiest, or which soda you should be serving to your infant. Um, and if you cannot trust these so-called professionals, you need to be able to trust yourself and your own judgment. And to do that, you must have critical thinking skills. And anything you can do to develop and sharpen those critical thinking skills, I think will be good for you. And then our final story for today um, is, of course, the attack on Stonehenge, which we reported on Wednesday. And I believe we were the first pagan source to report on it. And this was I would call it a terrorist attack on Stonehenge, which is one of the major pilgrimage sites of modern paganism, as well as a World Heritage Site of great importance archaeologically and culturally. And a group called Stop Oil painted it with orange paint immediately before the solstice celebration, which is a major pilgrimage for many pagans. And I see this as being yet another example of an attempt to disrupt a pagan religious celebration and to damage a monument of great importance to our community. And yes, I'm aware there's more there than just that, but I think that as members of this community, we need to focus on what directly affects us. And the Stop Oil people pointed out that this was a paint made from cornstarch that should not permanently damage the stones. And in fact, the Heritage Society that is in charge of Stonehenge has managed to already remove the paint. So in terms of lasting damage, there presumably is not a lot. The Heritage Society did point out, however, that while the paint may not do permanent damage to the stones, um, some of the lichens and local fauna and flora that um, live on the stones and in the area were damaged. And had it rained before they had a chance to get the paint off, then its damage would have been more permanent. That had it gotten wet, it would have made stains that would have been far harder to remove. However, whether there's lasting damage to the monument or not is not what our community needs to be exclusively concerned with. Of course, we should be concerned with that, but it's also the access to the monument that we need to be concerned with, because we, as the pagan community in our various forms have no control over access to this very sacred site. I think the vast majority of modern Western pagans would agree it's a sacred site, some more than others, but I think everyone would pretty much agree with that. And for some, again, it's a major place of pilgrimage. Um, and especially at the summer solstice, the ceremony that this act was presumably intended to disrupt. And I think we need to be mindful of the fact that English Heritage has already talked about shutting down public access to protect the site. Something like this certainly raises concerns about the safety of the site, and therefore their willingness to continue to let people assemble there. And I think that for myself, one of the reasons I view this as an attack on our community is realizing how easily it could push English Heritage into closing off this site and denying our people what has become a major pilgrimage attraction and practice. And I think that we cannot simply ignore the effect it could have on us. Now, the fact that it does not seem to have caused a lasting damage is certainly wonderful, but I don't think that we have any business forgetting about this for that reason. Because, again, there are other kinds of damage it may yet cause. And there's an emotional damage it has caused. Because while it may not have done any lasting damage to the stones, I would argue that it's done some psychological damage to many of the people who revere this site, and many of those who um, are meeting there uh, for the solstice during the course of the year, or who go there for other reasons during the course of the year. And I think that for us, it underscores our vulnerability in a way that we need to be mindful of and we need to work on changing. It is not good to be in a position where one of your most sacred sites can be this easily damaged or denied to you. And granted, part of the answer to that is developing our own contemporary sacred sites. And some of us have that. The Aquarian Tabernacle Church, for example, have their headquarters. The Corellian tradition, although we don't necessarily have a particular location, have this whole Danville, Vermilion County area as our homeland, to which we do perform a pilgrimage every 5 years, particularly to the banks of the Vermilion River. The Fellowship of Isis has a number of places, notably the Isis Oasis in Geyserville, California, which are modern pilgrimage centers, which they have control over to some extent or completely. But I think as a community, we need to be mindful of this. And one of the things I've noticed is certain very important pagan festivals have been repeatedly forced to change their location year after year for various reasons, not least because they don't control the location site. Sometimes there have been issues of prejudice involved. Sometimes there have been issues of what facilities were and were not available. But it does make for a certain amount of insecurity and discomfort when you don't know where that festival is going to be when it is a major pilgrimage site for you. And for a lot of our modern Western pagan community, at least in the United States, those festivals are the pilgrimage sites. And there are a few festival grounds that are actually in pagan hands. But I'm hoping that we will see many more of them in the future, because this is going to be an important issue. In recent years, I was going to say in the last year, but it's more than just the last year. There's been a full-on movement to disrupt public pagan celebrations. This is very noticeable in Salem in the last Samhain season, when the major public ceremony was physically invaded by Christian demonstrators who disrupted the ceremony, and apparently could do so because it was a public ceremony. And we've also, on this program and elsewhere on Corellian and Divination TV and our predecessor, Pagan World TV, talked about how pagan events, such as various pagan pride days, have had people show up for the express intent of disrupting them, sometimes more successfully than others. One of the most notorious was at Witchfest in New York. This last year, it did not happen, partly because of a lot of work being done to prevent it. But in previous years, they've had very disruptive protesters show up every year out of hatred and no other purpose to disrupt this event. And we cannot assume that this is going to get less. And we must come up with decent protocols of what to do about it. And, I would look to the Order of Paladins, among other similar organizations, as places where this should be a topic of conversation, where strategies and plans should be being worked on for this sort of occasion. And I hope that we will see more of that in the future. And finally, today is a major birthday day. And, I don't always mention birthdays on the program, but I think today I will. I want to wish a happy birthday to the Archpriestess Christiana, to Dee Polachek, to Sir Ebony Nash, to the Reverend Gary Strout, and to Prudence Priest, among other people with birthdays on this date. To my nephew Dale, who will probably never see this, but I wish him a happy birthday. And to everyone with a June 21st birthday, happy birthday to you. With that, we've used up our half hour. And I want to thank you for joining me. I'll be back next week, but this weekend, we will have 2 broadcasts that I would like to encourage you to join us for. And the first is the Pagan News broadcast, which will be Sunday afternoon. And I hope that you will join us for that. And then Sunday evening, we will have our online solstice ceremony. And I will be joined in that by Reverend Mary Hawk, by the Most Reverend Alyssa Kemp and the Most Reverend Phoenix Coffin Williams, by Sir Ebony Nash, by Reverend Brian Ellicott and Reverend Mary Cavalcante. So it's going to be a lovely ceremony. Please join us for that. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful day, and let us close with our prayer as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to be cognizant of the good and wonderful things that surround us and the many happy events in our lives. But help us also to use our critical thinking skills and to see those things which should cause us concern and to take practical actions to make them better. Help us to find practical strategies and solutions to those things which hold us back in life or would cause us damage. And help us to implement these in the most positive manner as we go forward in our lives. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for this and all you do in our lives, and knowing you are always with us. From respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always. And I will see you this weekend or next Monday, as the case may be.